Hello all, and welcome back to another episode of TV and Us, a conversation show about the TV series we just can't stop talking about. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And each season we focus on a different show, reviewing it episode by episode, and we invite you to watch along with us. Right now we are reviewing Severance Season 1, and today we are on episode 7 titled Defiant Jazz. If you haven't watched it yet, this is your spoiler alert. Please check it out before continuing to listen to the rest of this episode. All right, Sarah, start us off with a summary for episode 7.
Mark and the team encounter new security measures from Cobell.
Okay. And in TVNS tradition, let's start off with our episode titles of choice for this episode. What is yours, Sarah?
Mine is Emotional Convenience.
Nice. What a fascinating phrase in general.
Yeah, it's so good.
Okay, my episode title is Music Break.
Yes, we do have one of those in here. We have two of those, I guess you would say.
Yeah, we do. And big important things happen during them. Okay, well, let's dive in, shall we? And we are chugging along. We are on episode 7, only 2 episodes left. A lot happens in this episode. Sarah, I'm curious your thoughts.
I'm so sad that Bert is leaving.
Yeah.
Ugh, that goodbye scene, and Irv is so upset. And I'm like, Irv, I feel you, man. I feel you. We're losing our pal. So that was just so sad to see. And we learn a lot of other things. You know, Dylan makes some bold choices in this episode. Our little macro data refinement team are actually now unified and are ready. Like, let's take down this evil corporation. So like, we got some big movement here, both inside and outside. So yeah, we're making some choices here. We're moving along. We're gonna see what happens next.
This episode feels like a lot of ground is covered, but it does feel like foundation laying for the ending. You know, like there is a sense of something has snapped in everybody, and now we've got 2 episodes left of runway to see this unified MDR team. What are they going to do next? There's some big reveals that happen in the outside world as well. I think one that is quite notable that we end on a cliffhanger because it's Severance, and that's what we do every episode. But we learn that Mark's wife, the photo of her is of Miss Casey. So I'm curious your thoughts about that reveal as well that we end the episode with.
Honestly, I was annoyed. So for a while, I've been wondering, because the show keeps talking about his wife and Gemma and everything. And so I was like, okay, is the show going to do something silly like have his wife be one of the Severance workers? And so I was like, could she be Helly? I was like, well, that wouldn't work. And so then I was like, would it be Miss Casey? And I was like, really? Are we going to do that? And the show did that. And I just hate the way that was shot, because I don't know, man. It's just, and like Mark is clearly very drunk in that scene, and he's being the worst. And I'm back on the anti-Mark train after this episode, because he rips up the photo of his wife, and it's this very big dramatic thing. And then he has this like moment of sorrow. And so then the camera is fixed on him as he's bent down and picking up all of the little pieces, and they seem so important. And then he comes to the table and he's gingerly taping everything together, and his hand is covering her face so we can't see. And it's just this really like dramatic buildup. And I'm like, really? You can't, like, I hate how melodramatic all of that was. And I don't know, to me, like, it didn't have this like huge impact of like, oh my gosh, like, it was just like, okay, yeah, we're doing this really weird thing in this really weird show. and you just strung that out in the most obnoxious way possible. So I was really annoyed
Uh-huh.
by the end of that episode. So I whatever. Okay, Severance, we're doing this. Let's go.
See, Star Wars can do the whole like the family dramatic reveal thing because that is iconic. But there's already so much that is confusing and meaningful uh, and we already have a million questions that I don't really think we needed another big reveal. You know what I mean? Like if we just before episode 7 started, before that reveal happened, if we just make progress to uncover a little bit more about how all of these things are connected, that's already great. We will be so satisfied. We don't need another thing to then be connected to each other in some really meaningful way to create more stakes. You know, like usually that moment of like, it's actually his wife is supposed to create questions and momentum and tension that we want to then figure out and uncover how, you know? And I think we have enough how and why questions built up to this point in episode 7 that it feels a little bit indulgent to like throw another one into our already overflowing bucket of questions.
Yeah, because I don't know, it just feels like almost like a cheap shock factor rather than like a really necessary plot device. And I don't know, there's been like little things. So my the initial thought that I had that tipped me off to it might be Miss Casey is in an earlier episode when Mark does his wellness check. When he comes in, she has the same candle that's in Gemma's crafts box in Mark's basement. And so, like, the
Oh,
show has been setting it up also in that wellness check. He, like, forms a tree, which is where her accident happened. So, like, the show's been dropping a couple of hints that this is where we're going. But like you said, it's not needed. We already know that the world is weird. We already know that Lumen is doing shady stuff with people's brains more than they've let on. Like, do we really need this too? I think especially because I don't know, Mark as a character, I have struggled with. And so adding in this additional piece of like the trauma that he's trying to forget, but she's actually there with them. Like I don't know what we're doing with this. I don't get where we're going other than just shock and surprise. And
mm,
I mean, I guess maybe it'll make sense in the next 2 episodes, but it felt cheap to me, and I feel like there probably was a more elegant way to do that reveal without all of the melodrama, but it also just might be me getting upset about little things that I just shouldn't be annoyed by.
no, I think, well, we talk about this often with films and also with TV, but there is a relationship that we as a viewer have with the piece where we, at a certain point, choose to give over and surrender our trust into the show. We surrender our emotional investments into the show to go on this journey. And when a show is able to nurture that, take care of that, satisfy that, it is so great. And we continue to trust the show even further, right? But when it feels like it's being used and channeled in these really feel ways that feel unnecessary, I think that's when some of that relationship between us and the show starts to break down, or at least I feel this way. Um, and it's always fascinating to see in a show like at what point do you just give yourself over? You're like, okay, yes, I think I'm down for this journey. Because at the beginning, you're kind of like, okay, let's see what you're gonna do here. I'm keeping an eye on this to see how this develops. And then at a certain point, usually episode 3 or 4, you're kind of you're bought in, right? And there's a responsibility and a stewardship that I think a show does of that emotional investment that its viewers have, and the choices that it makes matters quite a bit. So actually a great example of this is when we reviewed Succession the last season. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen Succession's final season yet. But there's a point where Logan dies in episode 3, and we're like, okay, like that was shocking, but now there's all of these stakes and full on trusting that the show is going to be able to take us on this journey. Now that the central force of gravity has been removed, we trust that the relationships and the dynamics between all of these colorful personalities are going to shake out in a way that we will feel satisfied with. And it does. And it's really great when that happens, when we felt that journey start and we arrived at a destination at the end that we're like, okay, yes, I am pleased. That felt right. It felt actually inevitable for all of these characters. And it's fascinating to see a show make a choice like this when we already have so much that we're invested in to figure out, like, what is Lumen doing? What is there going to be a coup from MDR? What is going on with reintegration? Who is behind it? What's happening with Miss Corbell? What is his birth theme? Like, we have plenty of those. So to add yet another one on there, I'm like, y'all didn't read, you didn't understand how we would watch the show, because we didn't need any more. We're already there, and just to take us to a destination, or at least a point, a milestone on the way to our destination of uncovering this all would be great as we write out the next 3 episodes. So I think that's been fascinating to think about, of like you're mentioning, this feels cheap, this feels like a shock factor, and what does that do to how we then watch the next 2-3 episodes of the show.
And I think it's disappointing for me too, because I was feeling this episode, man. Like, we start and we are immediately dropped into the action. Mark learns a little bit more about reintegration. What is her name? Rigabi? Is that her name? Yeah, Rigabi just like bludgeons Grainer to death with a bat. Like, it's so intense the way that it starts. And then we go into Lumen, and it's like really fun, but also tense. And like, it really effectively captures that eerie dissonance that this show is really good at. And we see that showing up in a number of scenes. And like, the acting in this is so good. And then we end with this. Like, I was so annoyed, because I was having a good time with this episode, and characters progress and we're making choices, and like, there is a momentum in this episode. And then we get that little added on moment of him being terrible to Alexa, this poor woman who gave him a shot, and she is so gracious to him, and he is just a jerk. And then the cheap reveal. So I was just, it took me from such a high in this episode to such a low, because it just feels the best way that I can describe it is cheap. And so I think I haven't trusted this show just because of the feedback that I've heard from everybody, and everybody getting upset with it. So I'm not super invested. And then that, like, as I'm getting excited and as I'm like, yes, let's go, forward progress, and then it does the reveal, and I'm back to just not trusting the show again. So I'm a little skeptical about these last 2 episodes and where they're going to go, because like you mentioned, there is a lot going on, and I'm not sure that they're going to be able to solve all of these things in a way that's really satisfying. And it makes me wonder if we're going to have more of these kind of like cheap twists in these last 2 episodes, which is going to really annoy me if that's the case. So I'm going to just remain detached, because I'm not trying to get too upset about this show.
The show's playing with your emotions. It's teasing you. It's like, okay, we're on this journey. It's gonna be great. We're building momentum towards something, and then takes you for a little spin.
It's just lies. I don't like it. Why would you do that? It's so not necessary. Okay, I'm gonna stop harping on the last like 5 minutes of this episode. We can talk about something else.
Well, I think you shared some great perspective, though, which is that the first whole section of this episode is fabulous. Like, there's really great movement in progress towards unearthing and uncovering what this all is when we meet the chick that did the reintegration. We see that one of the key Lumen security head of security is taken out. There's this security card that's given to Mark, and so there's a lot of progress there. And then we see MDR unify, and everyone has snapped fundamentally in some way and is ready because uh previously in the show, different characters have been ready to take down Lumen at different intensities. You know, like obviously Helly from the beginning has been like, just let me get out of here. But we see the ways that the rebellion and small acts of rebellion have now been fanned into this full-fledged commitment that they all make together as they look at each other to say, let's do this. Like, let's take down the whole thing. I love that line when Irv is like, let's burn the place to the ground. And he was the most loyal of them all. You know, he was such a Lumen groupie. And now we see the full transformation for him too. And what I love is that for both Dylan and Irv, especially, it's them seeing potential and possibility with people that they love that Lumen has now thwarted and cut off for them. That's the shift. It's the loss of loved ones. So for Dylan, it's his son, the perception that there is a son that is out there, but Lumen has kept him from him. And for Irv, it's Bert, you know, and this whole system where he's really fallen in love and built this connection with someone. Bert is getting taken away from him. And that is a thing that, you know, snaps in both of them where they are now willing and ready to take the whole thing down. But I think that is a huge moment for these characters as well. Those small acts of rebellion have really built into this now big forest fire of we're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. And you feel the conviction in each of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's very exciting how that team up happens, you know, and seeing what motivates each person and how that kind of reveals more about who they are and what drives them. Um, and, you know, we've been talking about an OND coup, and now I appreciate that it's going to be the MDR coup. And maybe they'll be able to recruit some OND people, but they've lost their greatest into that department. So maybe it's just MDR on their own. But it's also going to be interesting to see kind of what direction they go in. They seem to really be interested in this overtime contingency, which makes sense because, you know, Dylan wants to see his son again and learn more about his life. And then Helly wants out and wants to know about her life and her outside self and all of that. So I'm curious how they will use either that experience to get something out of Lumen, or I don't know, like I'm curious what their next step is, because like strategically I feel like you need more than what they have to burn the place to the ground. I'm all for burning it to the ground though. So I'm just curious what their next move is. And then Harmony is just out here making very strange moves. So it'll be interesting to see what her game is, because she appears to be playing a very long game, but I'm just not sure what she's doing. So she's kind of an interesting little wild card off to the side. And we'll see how she responds to all of these new and exciting developments that are happening.
Yeah, and what's interesting about what Corbell's doing is that for a while we see the power dynamic between her and the board, right? Like she is very much answering to the board, but the presence and knowledge of the reintegration, you know, evidence seems to be like a you know, point, a card for her to play, because she throws that card down on the table with such confidence and with such, you know, bravado that showcases like this is a negotiating chip or something that is in her favor, that she has the evidence of reintegration actually having occurred. And I'm curious to see like how that plays out between her and the board, because the board is clearly now afraid. The board is ready to meet in person when she shares about that. So something about, obviously the board is going to be afraid of the concept of reintegration existing because it breaks down their whole system, their whole house of cards that they've built up. But like, how will Corbell use that information? Because she's clearly not faithfully serving the board and has her own agenda and her own outcomes that she's looking to drive. And so it'll be fascinating to see what she does with that card.
And that moment between her and Natalie as kind of the mouthpiece for the board was fascinating, because we've seen this dynamic with the board a few times. You know, the first time Harmony was the one communicating for the board, and then the second time was Natalie communicating to Harmony on behalf of the board. And now we see Harmony has more leverage, and she is not holding back. And so I'm so intrigued what she is going to do. And I really want to see the board in person. I don't know where these last two episodes are going to go, but I really hope that we get to see them, because I think that that would also be fascinating, because they've just been not even a voice on a phone. They've just been a silent presence. So it's going to be really interesting if we finally do get to see them. What do they look like? How do they present themselves? How do they communicate? Is there going to be something like interesting and new and creative that they use to talk? I don't know. It's just, there's so much intrigue around the board, which is pretty funny, given uh corporate structures and things today. And there's so many times when you're working and it's just like, oh yeah, the board asked for this, or the board wants us to do this, and they're just kind of this like disembodied thing that's just hovering over the corporation. So I do appreciate that these conversations are constantly pointing us back to a reality that I'm sure many of us have experienced before. So I think all of that intrigue is potentially building up to something that could be fun and creative.
Yeah, no, that's so true. They've been kind of this shadowy, truly shadowy figure. We don't know anything else about them, and so for them to come and maybe show their face, we'll see. I don't know. They seem to be teasing that a meeting of some sort will happen, but we will see. All right, other big things that happens in this episode that we wanted to mention.
What else? Oh, we should probably, so your birth
Yeah.
theme
Mhm.
kind of continues. We see Harmony in her alter ego, I guess it would be, helping Devin. And Devin floats a theory about that rich lady maybe being severed, which is
Mhm.
interesting. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, the birth theme continues. It is alive and well, everybody. Uh, I I had forgotten that whole conversation from the first time I watched. I was probably distracted by other things, but there's this whole fascinating conversation that definitely pushes the birth theme forward, which is Mark's sister suggesting, like, hmm, if we can use severance for office workers to essentially not have to bring the stress and distractions of work into their personal lives, we could use it for a lot of other things that are undesirable that are part of being a human, like having to be pregnant and give labor. And so and also Corbell's facial expression in that conversation seems really interesting too and noteworthy. Um, she doesn't seem surprised. She seems kind of like, oh, that could happen. There's a look of knowing on her face. I mean, Corbell always has a look of knowing, but especially in that scene too, they definitely cut to Corbell's face, and she seems to clearly note, oh, she's onto something here. And so I think that's really fascinating, is to think about. We've seen Severance in the context of Lumen, but likely Lumen has agendas if they own the severance procedure to be able to use it in many other contexts as well. We may not have seen it yet, or it's also not been rolled out at that scale yet. So, as we look ahead to season 2, fascinating to think about, like, does the world and context and domain areas of where severance occurs expand? We've seen it in the context of The Office, but will the world expand? The severance world will expand. Um, the other interesting part of that um, conversation that we see, earlier in the episode, not necessarily that conversation between Corbell and Mark's sister, but with Mark and the chick that does the reintegration procedure, is she says to him, "You brought him into this world without his permission, based on your own desire for emotional convenience." And that phrase, "you brought him into this world," reminds me a lot of the way that we talk about having children. And I was just thinking about, like, this theme of these outies are birthing their innies without the accountability and responsibility and full ownership of, like, their lives after they've been birthed and created, is really interesting to think about. This one's maybe more of a stretch of the birth theme, but I was like, is this show about parenting, and this whole construct of Lumen and The Office and work, as a kind of loose, larger metaphor around, like, parenting and the responsibilities of parenting, but also the accountability of, like, what kind of environments we choose to bring our children into. Just interesting, like, other dimensions of the birth theme that continue to, some of them are stretches, but it was fascinating to mull on.
Hey, I like it. Yeah, let's go. Let's stretch this theme as far as we can. Yeah, I thought that conversation in the opening was so interesting too. I want to know so much more about Ragabi and kind of her backstory, because she very clearly knows about Lumen. I think it was the previous episode, Grainer talks about that the hack was ours. And so she has some insider knowledge or something. And then now she went from working for the Empire to now being part of the Resistance, I'm assuming. And I want to know so much about her, especially because she just unloads on Mark and it's so satisfying. And it just brings an interesting perspective to this whole severance procedure. And I am appreciating how the show is constantly giving us these little glimpses into how problematic a procedure like that would be. And I I like to extend that even to, like, how problematic compartmentalization is. Um, because really Severance is just like a very, very extreme version of that. And so thinking about the way that we do isolate parts of ourselves, and that harms us and that harms others. And so I love how this show, through little lines of dialogue like that, like, it gives us an opportunity to maybe think more deeply about our culture and how we move about the world, because what they're dealing with is a very extreme version of what we deal with every day. And so it's such a smart show in that regard, and it's really effective in those moments too.
Yeah. No, that's interesting to think about, like, the other dimension of this around separating parts of yourselves. And also, what's great about the coup is, or the planned coup that is unfolding, is that the show's basically like, it's impossible to, and your parts of yourselves will find a way and deeply desire to be one. And we were not made to be compartmentalized in this way, because all these sides are making you whole. And so the kind of inevitability of reintegration, I think is kind of interesting to think about as well, if you think about it from that like larger lens or metaphorical lens too.
And I think it's especially interesting because, and this is applicable for the two of us because of how we've watched these shows, but we just finished Supercell on Netflix, and that show is very different, obviously, but that show is so intentional to focus on our heroes as whole people, and it really creates like a holistic version of them rather than just focusing on one aspect of them, aka their powers. And I loved that about that show because I feel like it's so different than a lot of other shows that we've seen, or movies that we've seen about superheroes, because it is a holistic picture of who these people are and their communities and their dreams and desires, and like all of these things that we don't always get when it's like superpower focused. And then we go straight into Severance, which couldn't be more different and is all about people literally dividing themselves up. And
Mm.
I'm just, I that contrast is just so stark to me, and it's kind of jarring to go from this show that's very contextual and very integrated to something that is so very separate. And so I think that's why I keep thinking so deeply on and like returning to these themes of compartmentalization, is just because we spent 6 episodes in a show where that was not the case. And then we go directly
Mm.
into Severance, which is just all divisions. It's fascinating.
Very interesting. Yeah, yeah. The contrast is jarring and also interesting. Like that's the juxtaposition of us reviewing these two shows back to back allows us to see that contrast more clearly, which is really fun. I know people often talk about this with like when they're reading multiple books at once. They often like will see these like really interesting connection points between like this book around like human psychology and how that relates to this character in this novel that they're reading. And so getting to see those points of connection between these two shows or contrast between these two shows is also really fun. Okay. Other big things that we want to hit on before we give out some awards?
I do appreciate the lengths that Milchek is going to try and keep everything kind of under control. And
Mm.
you see, I'm so fascinated by him as a character because Cobell in she like instates all of these security measures, and then obviously Milchek is the face and is the one that's rolling these out. And he is also, though, finding little ways to seemingly care for employees too. So like I'm never sure how to read him. Is like, are you an agent of the empire, but you have a little bit of a heart, so you're trying to do nice things? Or are you fully bought in to the Lumen business and are just doing these nice things as a tactic of manipulation, So he
Mm.
brings Mark a cup of coffee when he first comes in, and he knows Mark's coffee order too. And then he gives, Helly the dance party, even though she wasn't at 75%, she was at 73%, but it's close enough and they deserve a party. So I'm so interested in Milchek. He's just such an interesting character. And I also just want to shout out Tremel Tillman, who is the actor who plays Milchek, because he is fantastic in this episode. You see moments of joy and fun and silliness in him, and then you see those moments when he is kind of terrifying, and he gives a fantastic performance in this episode in particular.
Yeah. that insidiousness of the kindness is definitely a staple of who he is as a character. And it's almost easier to accept someone like Corbell, who is just so blatantly power tripping and waving her authority left and right and very clearly aggressive and intense. But that combination of kindness, but also the exacting discipline as well is more confusing, more confusing for the characters that are relating to him.
Hmm. Which makes it fun and interesting,
Yep.
like you never quite know what Milchek is going to do
Yeah.
because you don't know, is this going to be a kill him with kindness situation, or is this going to be a I'm going to scare you moment because he's so good at like bringing the hammer down, So he always keeps you on your toes. And I think that that's really fun.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so good. Okay, let's give out some TVNS awards. The first category is Employee of the Week. What is your choice?
Yeah, I want to give this to Rigabi because she also hates the word any. And I felt so much solidarity in that moment. I was like, yeah, you get it, girl. And I appreciated that.
Mm-hmm. She says that it's so infantilizing,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Yep.
true.
Yeah.
I'm giving this award to, it's like an anti answer, Dylan snapping, mostly because it is such a defining moment where you see everyone else also give themselves permission to snap. So it's great. It doesn't make him a great employee because he literally attacks his boss, but it's great for the plot.
It's so good. I loved the way that built up to him snapping. Way to go, Dylan. Way to go.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, the next award category is Move the Needle Moment. What is your choice?
Yeah, I want to give this to the dance party, And I don't know, it might just be me, but it was giving me real like Twin Peaks vibes, which made it even more like eerie and mysterious. But it's such a like fun moment, and there's like moments of joy within that, but it's also kind of eerie and creepy. And then obviously then it leads to your employee of the week snapping, which is kind
Mm-hmm.
of a big deal in this episode.
Yep. Oh, yeah, it's very true. The mood and the temperature shifts significantly in that scene. My choice for this award is the Mark's wife reveal at the end. The needle has been moved,
The
both for the
needle has
show,
been,
both
yes.
for the show because the show's got to like do something with that. You can't introduce that and then not give us more. And so
Mm-hmm.
the scope of what the show needs to do in the next two episodes definitely opened up more. They have a much harder task, but it's also moved the needle moment in our feelings about the show.
Well played. I like it.
Okay, the next category is achievement in corporatees. What is your choice for this?
When Milchek says to Dylan, this OTC is pretty need to know.
Yes. That's a great one. That's a great choice. And you're like, okay, great, cool. Glad there's things that I don't need to know. All that happens all the time, especially managers in corporate. They'll be like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, I can't reveal too much right yet. Just know that something's coming, but like I can't tell you yet. And you're like, well, you didn't have to tell me
Yeah.
any of that. It's fine. Like I get that you're in the know.
It's that mixed with an acronym. And I was
Yeah.
like, man, this is just like peak corporate speak.
Mm-hmm. My choice for this award is when Marx asks Milchek, "Are we locked in now?" And Milchek responds, "I prefer the phrase safely situated."
Oh, I love it so much. It's so good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're safely situated, Mark. Be
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah. What does Milchek say in the previous episode? I think this is a great moment for us to use some gratitude here, to employ some
Yes.
gratitude in all of us for all that Lumen does.
Yes, be grateful that you are safely situated
Yeah.
behind these locked doors.
It's hardcore giving oppression vibes. Okay. Looking ahead, we've got two episodes left. What are you hoping to see, curious to see? Are we copy and pasting from previous episodes? Are there new things?
Well, I can't say O&D coup anymore, so I guess it's the MDR coup. I'm really looking forward to that. We already talked about the board. I'm very interested to see them in person. And then a question that I have from this episode is, uh, after our MDR friends read the instructions for the overtime contingency, it appears that you need two people to do that function. And Milchick had said that he was doing that. He was visiting Dylan like without Harmony knowing.
Mm.
And so I'm very curious who was helping Milchick do that, you know? Like, how did he do that? If two people are needed for that contingency, who was helping him? So is there another person that either we haven't met yet, or we haven't seen in a certain light yet, that was helping Milchick behind the scenes? So that's probably my biggest question from this episode.
Yeah, yeah. And also, like, Milchek seems to have done that without anyone else really knowing about it. You know, there's like no other conversation that he has with anyone about that choice that he makes. And so, like, why did he make that choice too? If he did it with somebody else, who, or if he did it on his own, how? Essentially. Yeah, that will be fascinating to see if that question gets answered for you. um I also found it interesting that clearly the company doesn't have the capability to like wipe or tune or correct people's memories. So Dylan obviously has such clear awareness of the fact that he has a son, and that just feels like such a miss on the part of the corporation, because you it's inevitable that if the innie finds out that there's this whole life or gets a glimpse of their life outside, the whole house of cards starts to crumble, because there is now an emotional connection that's made with something or someone, that you're going to get your whole rebellion on, you know? And so I expected that memory would have been wiped somehow or corrected. And the fact that it doesn't, and very clearly is now igniting a whole rebellion, is interesting to me on how much like Lumen seems like a very powerful force in a lot of ways, but they also aren't that all knowing, and all they aren't that like sophisticated quite yet. You know, even the conversation we've had in the past around surveillance, and the fact that it seems like Lumen would have incredible surveillance, but it's not perfect, and there's a lot that they're missing. They didn't see Helly try and take kill herself in the elevator. They didn't see a lot of these characters having really intense conversations about how they want to join up together. So they're missing a lot as well, which I think makes it fun to see like where those gaps are, and then how our MDR team will take advantage of them.
Yeah, that reveal in the security office, I think, is really significant and reveals a lot about Lumen as a company. I think, like, to me, I had been thinking about this company as like a really like advanced
Mm-hmm.
company that has like all of these resources and is really strict in its surveillance and security and all of these things. But really, I think it's more like a cult than anything else. And it's just
Mm.
the, because like you can break free from Lumen, but you are so indoctrinated to not. And I think that reveal about the security cameras and going into the security office so easily, and just they have such bad security measures, just reveals that it's less of an imposing force and more of propaganda and indoctrination rather than anything else. And so I think that's going to be an interesting thing, like you said, for our MDR team to potentially exploit as they are now unified in the mission to burn this place to the ground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So we will see. We'll be here for this journey, for how this continues to unfold. The snowball is now rolling down the hill and it is collecting lots along the way. So this was our review and discussion of episode 7 of Severance. You can find it available on Apple TV+. Thank you for listening to today's episode of TV and Us. Our name sums it up. We're big fans of TV and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today as we continued our journey through Severance Season 1. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about episode 7. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at TVNSPod, or email us at tvnspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss episode 8, the penultimate episode of this season. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again with you real soon.